Part 74. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiaorong. Chapter 732. The stalemate between the eldest prince and the third prince continued. The third prince could not win over the tribes under Wanyanyan, and seemed to have given up completely. He disbanded and reorganized dozens of tribes under his control, and had about 30,000 troops under his control. The eldest prince controlled fewer troops than the third prince, but there were also about 30,000 troops. The 20 tribes under Wanyanyan's command only had about 10,000 people who could fight, and the combat power was quite different. This was also one of the reasons why the eldest prince and the third prince temporarily left Wanyanyan alone. Their biggest enemy was the other party. Once they won the key battle, it would be very easy to deal with Wanyanyan's 10,000 people. There were dozens of tribes of the Sushan people, some large and some small. The large ones were like Wanyan, Jiagu, Shuhu, etc., with more than 10,000 people, while the small tribes had only hundreds of people. The dozens of tribes added up to only more than 100,000 people, and the men who could fight were only more than 70,000. But we can't underestimate these 70,000 people. The Sushan people are famous for their ability to fight. 70,000 Sushan cavalry can easily defeat the Han army that is several times larger than them on the grassland. The Sushan people used to be the nightmare of the Han people, which is why they are so confident. They have a lot to bear in their shoulders, as they defeated the Chen army with 10,000 people and hundreds of thousands of people. Tang Ning calculated that no matter who would laugh last, the eldest prince or the third prince, Wanyanyan would have to face at least 50,000 troops in the end. These 50,000 people could never be resisted by the 10,000 people in her hands, but by that time, their reinforcements should have arrived. Tang Ning did not want the soldiers of the Chen kingdom to face the 50,000 troops of the Sushan people. After all, his initial idea was to replace them peacefully. He did not expect that the third prince would kill his father and usurp the throne, which completely messed up his plan. Tang Ning thought for a moment, looked at a servant in the tent, and said, "Let Aina come over." After a while, Aina came in, looked at Tang Ning, and asked, "Sir, are you looking for me?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "The eldest prince once planted an undercover in the Huiyan tribe. Do he and the third prince have your people?" Aina looked at him, nodded slightly, and said, "Yes. As long as the hoe is used well, there is no corner that cannot be dug down. The third prince can dig them, and they can also dig them in turn. After all, with Wanyanyan, there is no worry about food and drink. With the eldest prince and the third prince, not only do you not have enough to eat, but you also have to endure their exploitation. Anyone with ideals knows how to choose. It's like working for two bosses, one requires 996, and you have to go back to the company to work overtime on Sundays without overtime pay, and the other only needs to work 8 hours a day, and the salary and benefits are rich. You can tell which one is better at a glance. Of course, Wanyanyan's overall strength is not as good as the other two, and those tribes may have some concerns, but if these news spread, even if they can't have any substantial effect, they can cause some psychological panic." After listening to his words, Aina nodded and said, "I'll arrange it now." Zhide tribe. Zhide tribe is a tribe under the command of the eldest prince. The tribe is not big, but not very small. There are about 2,000 people in the tribe, and they have been under the command of the eldest prince for several years. In these years, the eldest prince took away a lot of good things from the tribe. The life of the Zhide tribe is not very good, but they can barely get by. Originally thought that after the eldest prince became Khan, this situation would improve. After all, they had been with the eldest prince for a long time, and they might get some preferential treatment. But who would have thought that the third prince killed the Khan and sat on that position himself? In order to compete with the third prince for the throne, the eldest prince forcibly requisitioned most of the food in the tribe, and even the able-bodied men in the tribe were taken away by them. The remaining old and weak also lived a life of eating one meal and not the next. The situation of the Sushan tribes was not very good. Hyman wanted to drive them out of the grassland, Chen Chu refused to let them go outside the border, and now there was constant infighting within the Wanyan tribe. Many tribes, including the Zhide tribe, could no longer see the hope of the tribe's continuation. In the past 2 days, there was also chaos within the Zhide tribe, and some different voices appeared. Some people thought that they should vote for the third prince. After all, the third prince was powerful and held the order. He was the real Khan. Following the eldest prince, the life of the tribe would only become more difficult. Others opposed this approach. They believed that there was no essential difference between the third prince and the eldest prince. Even if they voted for the third prince, their lives would not necessarily be better than now. What's more, the third prince killed his father and usurped the throne. He was an emotionless and cold-blooded person. He didn't even care about the old Khan's kindness in raising him, so how could he care about the life and death of their Zhide tribe? Just when these two different voices were deadlocked, another voice quietly spread among the tribe. In addition to the eldest prince and the third prince, they have a different choice. The fourth princess. The tribes under the fourth princess have always been the envy of other tribes. They have suffered a lot under the eldest prince and the third prince. Those tribes have no worries about food and clothing under the fourth princess. Other tribes live like people, but they live like dogs. I don't know how many people sighed secretly, why they were not assigned to the fourth princess. According to reliable sources, it is not too late to go to the fourth princess now. As long as you join the fourth princess, each household will have a quota of 10 kilograms of rice per month. The strong men who join the fourth princess's guards will not have to worry about food and drink. Compared with being under the fourth princess, being under the eldest prince and the third prince is really worse than being a beggar. The only thing that made them worried was that the fourth princess had few tribes under her command, and her strength was far inferior to that of the first prince and the third prince. Once the first prince and the third prince decided the winner, the fourth princess would not have many good days. It was for this reason that they suppressed their throbbing in their hearts and did not respond to the fourth princess's recruitment. Although the third voice did not cause much discussion in the Zhide department, one morning, everyone still found that more than a dozen tents were missing in the department. According to people familiar with them, these people went to join the fourth princess. After the first prince took away their food and cattle and sheep as wartime preparations, the remaining food was exhausted and it was difficult to make a living. Joining the fourth princess, they might be able to live a little longer. If they stayed in the department, they would starve to death immediately. They had no choice. The empty space left after the disappearance of these tents obviously stimulated many people. On the grassland of the Zhide department, tents began to disappear at a rate of 10 or dozens per day. After all, although they still had surplus food in their hands, they would eventually run out. Now it was a matter of life and death, and it was impossible to think about the future. The eldest prince has been in a panic these days. He discusses with his confidants how to fight the third prince every day, and has no time to take care of some trivial matters. When he received the news, the Zhide tribe, which had more than 2,000 people, was left with only a grassland, and the people were gone. The eldest prince's eyes were bloodshot, and he said angrily, "What, the Zhide tribe defected to the fourth princess?" "Don't be angry, eldest prince," a person next to him said, "one's Zhide tribe is harmless. As far as I know, there are also 2 tribes with nearly 2,000 people on the third prince's side." The eldest prince said with a gloomy face, "Restrict the tribes under your command. If anyone dares to defect again, he will be killed without mercy." The man nodded and said, "On the third prince's side, the Heshalai and Wendahan tribes are ready to defect to us. The Khan has done them a favor, and they cannot accept the fact that the third prince killed his father and usurped the throne." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 733. Heshalai and Wendahan tribes belonged to neither the eldest prince nor the third prince. They were two large tribes with more than 3,000 people. Such large tribes were previously firmly controlled by the Khan. The third prince killed his father and usurped the throne. He took the order. Half of the large tribes under the Khan fell under the command of the eldest prince, and the other half were recruited by the third prince. There were still a few tribes that were undecided. Heshalai and Wendahan tribes were two of them. The eldest prince temporarily suppressed his anger because the Zhide tribe defected to the fourth princess and asked, "Can Heshalai and Wendahan tribes be trusted?" The man thought for a while and said, "Why not observe them first? These two tribes have a large number of people. If they sincerely surrender, it will be of great benefit to us." The entire tribe under the eldest prince defected, and there was not much good news under the third prince. Among his tribes, two tribes with about 2,000 people defected to the fourth princess, and two of the tribes that were originally on the sidelines, the Heshalai and Wendahan tribes, also defected to the eldest prince. No matter how you look at it, the situation is very unfavorable to him. Although the situation is unfavorable, the expression of the third prince in the big tent is particularly calm. He played with a dagger in his hand and asked, "Does the fourth sister also plan to be independent?" A tribal leader behind him said, "The fourth princess has only more than 10,000 soldiers available. When we deal with the eldest prince, she will know what to choose. Even if she doesn't know, her tribes should know." He paused and said, "If they don't know, it won't be too late to wipe them out." The third prince put down the dagger and asked, "Is everything ready for the eldest prince?" The leader nodded and said, "Everything is ready." The third prince didn't say anything else, and the leader turned and walked out of the big tent. After leaving the tent, he took back his weapons from the door. Since the third prince took power, anyone who entered his tent had to put down their weapons first. In addition, the security around the third prince's tent was also very strict. There were 1,000 people patrolling alone. Anyone who wanted to make trouble around the tent would be shot on the spot at the first time. Wen tribe, Tang Ning looked at a list in his hand with a slightly surprised expression. Since they released the news, in less than 10 days, more than 5,000 people came from the eldest prince and the third prince, and several tribes surrendered as a whole. Several tribes that did not stand and watched from the sidelines since the death of the old Khan also had many tribesmen who could not bear the temptation of food. In total, Wanyanyan's men have increased by nearly 7,000 people these days. Tang Ning could not guarantee that all these people were here for food. Perhaps some of them had bad intentions, or they were spies sent by the eldest prince or the third prince. Therefore, he only accepted them on the periphery and randomly dispersed these tribes and distributed them in various places around. Providing these people with food for a while is fine, but if a traitor sneaks in, it may cause trouble at a critical moment. These days, in addition to Wanyanyan, the eldest prince also gained a lot. The addition of Heshalai and Wendahan made his men basically equal in number to the third prince. In addition, Heshalai and Wendahan also persuaded several small and medium-sized tribes that were on the sidelines to surrender. In this way, the eldest prince surpassed the third prince with a slight advantage and became the real king of the grasslands so far. And just yesterday, some forces under the eldest prince and the third prince had a big conflict. In this conflict, the eldest prince won in the end, which seemed to be in line with the saying that the righteous will have many supporters, and the unrighteous will have few supporters. The third prince's Khan position is not legitimate, and it is not his thing, and he is destined to lose it from his hands in the end. Tang Ning put down the list, and Wanyanyan walked in from outside. She sat at the table, holding her chin and looking at Tang Ning, and asked, "When will you marry me?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Didn't we agree to wait for 3 years?" Wanyanyan said, "I will find you in 3 years, and we can get married now." Tang Ning thought about it and said, "But your father Khan just died, and getting married now, isn't it not good?" Wanyanyan asked in confusion, "Why?" It seems that the grassland people may not have such taboos. Tang Ning looked at her and explained, according to our Han customs, we cannot get married 3 years after the father's death. Wang Yanyan frowned and said, I am not a Han Chinese. But I am. Tang Ning shook his head and said, people will talk about this. Okay, then Wang Yanyan was finally convinced by Tang Ning, and then looked at him and asked, you are not lying to me, are you? Tang Ning said, if you don't believe me, go ask Lao Zhang. Thinking of Lao Zhang, Wang Yanyan shuddered and said, I will believe you once. Tang Ning sighed in his heart. Participating in the competition was originally a stopgap measure, but who would have thought that he would go further and further on this road? He told too many lies and finally became the truth. He thought that Chen Wang's words before leaving were just a joke, but he was hit by his words. The tribe where the eldest prince is located is celebrating today. These days, since the Heshalai tribe and the Wendahan tribe surrendered, they have persuaded several tribes to follow the eldest prince, so that the eldest prince's power has surpassed the third prince and temporarily reversed the situation. In yesterday's war, the Heshalai tribe and the Wendahan tribe were the first to bear the brunt. The two leaders led the warriors in the tribe to fight hard, severely defeated the third prince, and won the first big victory. Today, the happy eldest prince held a banquet in the tribe to entertain many leaders under his command. The main purpose, of course, was to celebrate the victory. Congratulations to the eldest prince. The third prince is against human ethics and will not last long. The position of Khan will eventually fall into the hands of the eldest prince. Inside the big tent, the leaders of various tribes stood up one after another and showed respect to the eldest prince from a distance. The eldest prince's face was full of rosy glow, sweeping away the decadence of the past. In fact, he didn't need to be decadent. In the past few days, the morale of his tribes has been greatly boosted. On the other hand, the strength of the third prince's side has been frequently damaged, which also made him see that the Khan position, which is far away from him, is slowly coming towards him. Two figures came up and raised their glasses, saying, we also toast to the prince. Looking at Heshalai and the leader of the Wendahan tribe, the prince smiled and said, this cup should be toasted to the two leaders. Heshalai and the Wendahan tribe have made great contributions to him. These days, the prince has long dispelled his doubts about them and regarded them as his true confidants. The two leaders waved their hands, I dare not, I dare not. Hey, you two are welcome. The eldest prince waved his hand and said, yesterday's victory, you two have made great contributions. This king will remember this credit. If you want any reward, just ask. The leader of the Heshalai tribe bowed and said, this is my job. The eldest prince waved his hand and said, those who have made contributions should be rewarded, and those who have made mistakes should be punished. Otherwise, how can we convince the people? Thank you, eldest prince. The leader of the Heshalai tribe thought about it, looked up at him, and said, in this case, I dare to ask the eldest prince for something. The eldest prince walked up, looked at him, and asked, what is it? The leader of the Heshalai tribe looked at him, grinned, and said, I want your life. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 734. Chapter 729 of the main text volume of Ruyi Little Man. Third update. The eldest prince thought that the leader of the Heshilai tribe would ask for some reward from him, but the other party almost yelled, I want your life. After the words were written, there was no reaction for a moment. A lot can happen in one moment. The leader of the Heshalai tribe suddenly raised his hand, and a cold light flashed from his sleeve. At the same time, another cold light suddenly appeared from the hand of the leader of the Wendahan tribe on the side. Puff! Puff! There were two sounds of sharp weapons entering flesh. The eldest prince lowered his head and looked at the two daggers stuck in his chest. He raised his head with difficulty, pointed at the two of them, his lips trembled, and hissed, "You. The leader of the Wendihan tribe looked at him and said with a smile, "You can't be a Khan if you don't even have the slightest sense of defensiveness and trust others so easily. The eldest prince should go down and accompany the old Khan." The eldest prince took a few steps back and wanted to speak, but his throat seemed to be blocked by something. He knocked over the table and chairs behind him, fell to the ground, and never got up again. His wide eyes did not close until his heart stopped beating. The two of them were so close to the eldest prince that even the eldest prince himself had no time to react, let alone the people below. By the time they realized what had happened, the eldest prince had fallen into a pool of blood and was silent. "What are you doing? Someone, catch them. So you are traitors." There was a huge chaos in the tent. When several people rushed forward and captured the leaders of Wendihan and He Shili, several others ran in panic towards the direction where the eldest prince fell. One person stretched out his hand tremblingly, the prince poked his nose, then fell to the ground with a pale face, and said in a trembling voice, the eldest prince is dead." One person suddenly looked at the captured leaders of Wendihan and He Shili, and said angrily, "Hulai, Nitai, you are seeking death." Before what happened just now, no one thought that the two of them pretended to surrender and pretended to be loyal to the eldest prince just to deceive his trust and to assassinate him at this moment. The third prince's thoughts are so vicious. The leader of the Wendihan tribe was pushed to the ground, but he did not panic. He looked at him and said with a smile, "We are dead, and it is your turn next." The man pointed at him, his lips trembling, but he couldn't say anything. Once the eldest prince dies, the third prince will be invincible. Even if they kill these two people, the eldest prince will not survive. On the contrary, they themselves will definitely be questioned by the third prince. Seeing that he was silent, the leader of the Wendihan tribe struggled to stand up and said, "There are still two roads in front of you. Follow the third prince, or die. You choose yourselves." After the leader of the Wendihan tribe finished speaking, there was silence in the tent. When the eldest prince died, everything was lost. Even killing these two people would not change anything. Before them, there is a way of life and a way of death. If there is still a way of life to choose, who is willing to seek death? Everyone looked at each other for a few times, and the people who were holding down Wendihanbu and He Shiliabu gradually released their hands. The two moved their bodies, looked at the silent crowd, and said, "Very good. At the third prince's place." In the past few days, the third prince, who had traveled to several tribes and suffered a defeat, sat firmly in the tent and drank tea leisurely. What he drank was not the milk tea of the grassland, but the tea of the Han people. Tea produced by the Han people is also a necessity on the grasslands. They eat meat all day long and need this tea to relieve their tiredness. The third prince just likes it. Han Chinese tea is slightly bitter in the mouth and slightly sweet in the aftertaste, which contains infinite charm. He not only likes Han tea, but also likes Han culture. He reads Han history and learns Han art of war. His favorite Han emperor is Taizong of the Tang dynasty, and his favorite book is Sun Tzu's Art of War. The eldest prince Wanyanchu has never liked these things. He looks down on the Han people, is unwilling to learn Chinese, does not drink Chinese tea, and regards the Han people as two-legged sheep. Therefore, he does not know that there is a strategy in the 36 strategies of the Han art of war called the bitter flesh trick is to paralyze others by weakening one's own strength, and then defeat the enemy with one move when he is happy and relaxes his vigilance. He sat steadily in the tent. At a certain moment, a man opened the curtain and walked in. He respectfully walked to a place 10 feet away from him and said, "Third prince, they succeeded." The third prince raised his head and asked, "Is Wanyanchu dead?" The man nodded and said, "Hulai and Nitai took action when he was celebrating, and the eldest prince was stabbed to death by them at that time." The leaders of his tribes were also very aware of current affairs. After the eldest prince died, they all surrendered. The third prince rubbed the teacup in his hand and said, "Father Khan has always been fond of Wanyanchu. It would be good if he went down to accompany him earlier, so that the father and son can be reunited." He thought for a while and said, "Go to the fourth princess in person and ask her what she means. There are still 20 pieces that have not been taken back from the fourth princess." Naturally, the third prince will not sit idly by and do nothing. Hanel bowed and nodded, yes. Tang Ning had been in Chen country for a long time and was really not used to the changes in the grassland. No matter how fiercely King Duan and King Kong fought before, no one would try to kill Emperor Chen or assassinate the other. During the month he stayed on the grassland, the eldest prince sent people to assassinate the fourth princess, the third prince killed the Khan, and the third prince sent undercover people to the eldest prince's tribe and killed the eldest prince again. The Wendihan and Heshalai tribes surrendered to the eldest prince a few days ago and did many great things under him, causing the third prince to suffer a lot of losses. Even Tang Ning thought that they really received the favor of the old Khan. He couldn't stand the third prince's behavior. When he wanted to help the eldest prince to correct the chaos, he received the news of the eldest prince's death. The third prince joined the leaders of the Wendihan and Heshalai tribes and used the method of self-torture to deceive the trust of the eldest prince. Then, when he was celebrating, he assassinated him. The first hit was successful and the eldest prince died on the spot. The tribal leaders under him were leaderless for a while and had no choice but to surrender to the third prince. The third prince killed his brother and father, and finally sat firmly in the position of Khan and became the real king of the Sushan people. Of course, if he also had a mild obsessive-compulsive disorder, he must collect all the tribes of Sushan, and the next target would be Wanyanyan. After all, she still has 20 tribes in her hands. Although they are not big tribes, the tribes must be intact. If Tang Ning was the third prince, he would not let him go easily. As expected, the second day after the third prince sat firmly on the throne of Khan, he sent people to Wanyanyan to surrender, but was shot by Ai's arrow and ran back, indicating that there was no room for negotiation on this matter. In the tent, the third prince looked at Hanel and asked, "Does the fourth princess disagree?" Hanel wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and said, "I was almost shot to death by them before I entered the Wen tribe. Khan, the fourth princess clearly doesn't want to talk to us." "Then take the troops to talk to them." The third prince put down the teacup and asked, "Is 50,000 enough?" Hanel hurriedly said, "Enough. The fourth princess only has 10,000 soldiers and horses, and the third prince has more than 60,000 soldiers and horses. If they are allowed to dispatch 50,000 troops, I am afraid that the other party will surrender before the battle begins." In fact, there was no need to fight. With 50,000 troops approaching, the tribes under her command would surely rebel immediately. He took the command token from the third prince and said, "Khan, just wait for my good news." Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 735. Sushen's 50,000 cavalry will not be afraid even if they face Chen Chu's 200,000 troops. The dispatch of 50,000 people this time was largely to show off and intimidate, and the possibility of head-on confrontation was extremely small. After all, the tribes under the fourth princess are also the Sushan tribe. There is no deep hatred between them, let alone ethnic disputes, so how can they really fight with them? Hanel walked out of the tent with the command talisman in hand, a happy smile on his face. In the competition that day, although he was not physically humiliated by the four princesses, his soul was humiliated by them. Every time he thought about it after that, his teeth itched with hatred. She looked at the leaders coming towards her and said, "Get your troops in order and set off tomorrow." Wen Department. More than 20 tribal leaders who were temporarily under Wanyanyan gathered together, feeling worried or fearful, and people were panicked. The third prince has ordered Hanel to summon 50,000 troops. Fourth princess, what should we do? The old Khan is dead, and the eldest prince is also dead. Otherwise, we should surrender. We are all of the same race. The third prince should not do anything to us. If it comes down, will our life be better if it comes down? Isn't it still the same as before? Fourth princess, please speak. Wang Yanyan sat at the top, watching the arguments among the people, and said, every tribe has withdrawn 100 miles in advance. I will make my own arrangements for the rest. The troops pressing down on the territory and letting the tribesmen without fighting power take temporary shelter will indeed eliminate some risks. Even if something happens to the fourth princess, they will still have room to turn around when facing the third prince's army. At this time, it was not a wise choice to go directly to the third prince. The army went out to war, how could they return without bloodshed? If they were used as an example to boost morale and killed as a warning to others, who would they ask to reason? On the other side, Tang Ning was sitting in the tent, watching Xiao Ju holding a roasted lamb leg and asking, where is Lu Yat? 3 months ago, he was avoiding the leg of lamb, but now he was eating it with gusto, which showed that he was a heartless guy who never remembered his lessons. Xiao Ju, who hadn't eaten roasted lamb leg for a long time, put it down and said, I let her stay in Fengzhou. They had always been inseparable, but they actually separated at this time. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, is she pregnant? Xiao Ju's old face turned red with a rare blush, and he changed the subject and said, have you captured that little wild horse? He didn't deny it, but indirectly admitted it. Tang Ning shook her head. He came to the grassland to complete his mission and for world peace. A beast like Xiao Ju actually came to give birth to children. Beast Tang Ning looked at him, not hiding the contempt in her eyes. Xiao Ju asked, so did you capture the fourth princess? Tang Ning coughed lightly and said, I got it. The third prince sent an army of 50,000 to force the fourth princess to surrender. Many of her tribes had already withdrawn 100 miles away, and no one knew what was going on ahead. But if you think about it for a moment, you will know that the ending of the princess will not be very good. 50,000 versus 10,000, what is the ending? Do you still need to think about it? On the vast prairie, several kinki were galloping wildly. Scouts are an important unit on the battlefield. They usually go ahead with the army. Their main task is to reconnoiter the enemy's situation, detect the number and movement of the enemy's troops, and whether there are any ambush, etc. Although they knew very well how many soldiers and horses the fourth princess had and how powerful they were, as scouts, they still could not be careless. The terrain on the grassland is not complicated. There are woods, valleys, and water sources everywhere. They all know in their hearts that the fourth princess only has 10,000 people. Even if they ambush, they cannot reverse the situation. The 4 scouts came to a forest and were about to drive their horses forward. Suddenly, a whoosh and whoosh sound broke through the air from a certain direction. The horses under them were shot and killed, and the 4 of them were caught off guard. He rolled off his horse and before he could react, he was pinned to the ground by a figure emerging from the forest. Caught 4 more. These prairie people are quite careful. Stop talking nonsense, go behind that grassy slope and block it. The 4 scouts were tied up and stuffed in their mouths. They looked at the Han people emerging from the forest with extremely horrified expressions. It's 50 miles to the west from here. Another group of scouts were walking on the grassland. One of them laughed and said, the 4 princesses only have 10,000 people. Commander Hanel doesn't need to send any scouts. He can just send a large army to Wuyan tribe to capture them. The leader glanced at him and said, be careful whatever you say, that's stupid. 10,000 people can't defeat 50,000 people. It's still very easy to kill us. The man looked around, drove his horse up the grassy slope, and said, how can there be an ambush here? There are at most a few hundred people ambush ahead. Ah, it was discovered. As soon as he finished speaking, a voice came from under the grass slope. The scout's expression changed drastically, and he asked in surprise, "Who is it?" The three people under the grass slope were about to escape, but they were surrounded by dozens of cavalry who came out from behind the grass slope. 100 miles behind. 50,000 troops marched slowly on the grassland. The Sushan tribes were originally scattered all over the grassland. After the Wanyan tribe unified the Sushan tribes, in order to unify the management, the tribes slowly moved to a centralized area. From the time when the army started to gather, to when they rushed to the four princesses of the Wanyan tribe, it only takes 3 days. Hanel rode on his horse and turned around and asked, "Have any spies come back?" The leader shook his head and said, "No one has come back since half a day ago." Han Li had a trace of suspicion on his face. The dozen or so spies he sent out should come back to report every 2 hours. It was extremely abnormal that no one came back for half a day. He frowned and whispered, "What's going on? Is there an accident?" The leader drove his horse forward and said, "This is already the place where the fourth princess is. Maybe those spies were too close and were caught by the fourth princess's people." The army was not moving fast. Without scouts, it was like having no eyes. He didn't know the situation ahead. This situation made Han Li feel a little unsure. He tightened the reins and asked, "Will there be an ambush ahead?" The leader looked forward and smiled, "Commander Han Li, look, there is no place to ambush here. Behind the mountain ahead, there are at most 10,000 people ambushing. We have 50,000 people. Even if all the people of the fourth princess are ambushed there, what's the use?" As soon as he finished speaking, the ground under his feet suddenly shook. Hanel's face changed, and he shouted, "There is an ambush." He waved his hand and said, "All troops on alert." The leader looked ahead and said in surprise, "Does the fourth princess really want to fight us head on?" With 50,000 people against 10,000 people, Hanel still had a bottom line in his heart. There were grass slopes one after another in front of him, and he couldn't see the shadow of the enemy, but the vibration of the ground under his feet showed that a large number of cavalry were approaching in front. Hanel was riding on the horse, feeling the vibration of the ground getting bigger and bigger. A trace of surprise appeared on his face, and he murmured, "This sound is not right." He was born and raised in the grassland, so he naturally knew what it was like for light cavalry to gallop on the grassland. Not to mention 10,000, even if it was 50,000 light cavalry, the sound it made was not so dull, and the amplitude of the ground vibration was not so large. He looked up and looked forward, and saw a line on the grass slope in front of him. Under the sunlight, it emitted a dazzling light, which made people unable to open their eyes. Fupan Chinese. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 736. There was an enemy attack in front, and the well-trained Sushan cavalry formed a formation to meet the enemy in almost an instant. 30,000 troops charged from the front, and the other 20,000 surrounded from both wings. Although they were facing only 10,000 people, they did not slack off or take it lightly. Hanel breathed a sigh of relief. Although the fourth princess caught their spies and ambushed here, the victory or defeat was still determined by the strength of the two sides. 50,000 against 10,000, how could they win? Did she think she had 10,000 heavy cavalry? Such a thought flashed through Hanel's mind. When the 10,000 people in front rushed over, his body trembled violently and he almost fell off the horse. The cavalry in front was no more than 10,000, but they were all wearing armor, even armed to the eyes. Not only that, even the war horses under them were covered with thick armor. At this moment, a word emerged in his mind. Heavy cavalry. The grasslands had heavy cavalry before, but that was more than a decade ago. He had the honor of seeing heavy cavalry charging on the grasslands. The heavy cavalry, covered in solid armor, was like a moving steel wall. The light cavalry was vulnerable in front of them. A few hundred fully armed heavy cavalry could easily break through the defenses of thousands or even tens of thousands of light cavalry. When the Hanal tribe was at its peak, even the Wanyan tribe had to avoid its edge. But later, their tribe could not afford the huge resources required by the heavy cavalry, and was dragged down by the heavy cavalry. The leader at that time disbanded the team. Since then, he has never seen heavy cavalry again, but their terror has left a deep mark in his heart. They only have 50,000 light cavalry. Even if there are 50,000 or 100,000 more, they dare not confront these heavy cavalry head-on. Retreat, retreat. When Hanal realized that it was 10,000 heavy cavalry charging towards them, he gave the order to retreat. He knew that when facing the heavy cavalry, he must not stand in front of them no matter what. Fortunately, the terrain here is open. On the grassland, the heavy cavalry cannot outrun the light cavalry. As long as they avoid their charge, the light cavalry can easily drag the heavy cavalry to death. However, the retreat of 50,000 troops is not so simple. The formation of the team behind him was in chaos for a while. When they wanted to retreat to both sides, countless figures suddenly emerged from behind the distant hills. There were dense figures, more than 100,000. These people were obviously prepared to ambush here, surrounding Hanal and his 50,000 troops. At this moment, Hanal finally understood why none of the spies he sent out came back. The heavy cavalry that was running did not accelerate the charge and crush them with an unmatched attitude, but slowly slowed down in the middle and stopped completely when they were still 100 feet away from the 50,000 troops. This distance was enough for them to launch a new attack. Looking around, Hanal's heart had sunk to the abyss. These people were definitely not the fourth princess's troops. The fourth princess did not have so many heavy cavalry, let alone so many people. These people were Han people. The Han people sent so many troops into the grassland to ambush them here. 50,000 cavalry were surrounded by them. They were afraid that they would be exterminated this time. The two leaders beside him were already scared pale. Looking at Hanal, they asked in a trembling voice, "Commander, Commander, what should we do?" 50,000 soldiers were trapped in a circle, and everyone's face showed a terrified expression. Originally thought it was just a war without suspense, but unexpectedly there was no suspense, but they lost themselves. The opponent not only had several times their troops, but those cavalry surrounded by cold armor made them extremely scared. Hanal looked around and had already fixed on a position. If they did not charge head-on with these heavy cavalry and find a direction to break through, they still had the possibility of rushing out. He could surrender to the eldest prince, he could surrender to the fourth princess, but he would never surrender to the Han people. At this time, Wanyan Yan came out from behind the heavy cavalry and looked at Hanal from a distance. When Hanal looked up and saw her, his expression was stunned. Wanyan Yan's lips moved, and just as she was about to speak, Hanal simply turned over and dismounted, knelt on one knee, and said loudly, "Hanal is willing to surrender." Tang Ning had long discovered that these tribes on the grassland did not have any integrity or anything like that. As long as they were all Sushan people, they had a common ancestor, and they would follow whoever was strong. Therefore, the tribe under the third prince would still be theirs in the future. Naturally, they were reluctant to destroy their own things, so Tang Ning did not give the 10,000 heavy cavalry a death order. Otherwise, they would do nothing. After surrounding these 50,000 people, they would order these heavy cavalry to charge back and forth several times. Among the 50,000 people, there would not be many left who could stand up. Wanyan Yan's treatment was generous, and the third prince exploited them mercilessly. These days, the people arranged by Aina incited emotions among them. After they were surrounded, they could be encouraged again, and maybe they would surrender. This would minimize the losses. Wanyan Yan was reluctant to leave her people, and Tang Ning was reluctant to leave the soldiers of the Chen kingdom. What Tang Ning didn't expect was that Hanal was more sensible than he expected. Before Wanyan Yan spoke, he surrendered himself, and the main generals surrendered. The 50,000 cavalrymen behind him didn't hesitate for long before laying down their weapons. The third prince had only more than 60,000 able-bodied men who could fight. Now that 5 out of 6 were gone, the remaining 10,000 people could no longer cause any trouble. In other words, Tang Ning's trip to the grassland this time was almost settled. Wang Yanyan only needs to integrate these tribes to become a real Khan. He breathed a long sigh of relief and suddenly felt something strange in the atmosphere. When he turned his head, he saw Wang Yanyan staring directly at him, like a hungry wolf staring at its prey. Tang Ning couldn't help but shiver and asked, "What do you want to do?" Wang Yanyan looked at the 10,000 heavy cavalry and said, "Can you lend me these people for 2 years?" No, Tang Ning rejected her unreasonable request without any hesitation. These heavy cavalry were Chen Wang's treasures. After the threat on the grassland was lifted, they would return to the capital with him to resume their duties. If these things were lost, he would not be able to explain to Chen Huang. Wang Yanyan shook his arm and said, "Just 2 years." Tang Ning couldn't resist her teasing, and said helplessly, okay, after things here are settled, I will return to Beijing to help you ask for your Majesty's instructions. There is still the threat of black barbarians on the grassland. As long as the grassland and Chen state establish an alliance, Emperor Chen will not ignore it. He was also worried that after Hyman destroyed Sushan, he would become a threat to Chen Qiuxin. He would probably adopt the same strategy as supporting Shuhu and Jiago to contain the Wanyan tribe, and would fund Sushan's tribes to keep Hyman at bay in the Yinshan Mountains. Outside, Ayana and Ayu came over quickly with happy faces. Ayana looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Should we work together to capture the third prince?" "No need," Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "Let people spread the news and be careful with all the tribes. Anyone who is willing to surrender to the fourth princess can forget the past. Most of the third prince's fighting force has been captured by Wang Yanyan, and the rest are just the old, weak, sick, and disabled. If the strong men in the family are here, they will naturally follow them. As for the third prince, he was trapped in the shallows and couldn't afford to splash any water. Wanyan is in charge of the department, in the big tent." The third prince was drinking tea when a figure ran in a panic and said, "Khan, Chief Hanel." The third prince raised his head and asked, "Is Hanel back so soon?" The man pursed his lips and said in a trembling voice, "Chief Hanel and his 50,000 soldiers were ambushed midway and were captured by the fourth princess." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 737. Only the third prince's men know how difficult his journey has been. The eldest prince was deeply loved by the Khan, and the second prince was more talented. It was difficult to surpass the two of them and sit in the position of the Khan. However, God favored him. 2 years ago, the second prince went to Chu as an envoy to instigate rebellion and was killed. He died in a foreign land. He originally thought that after the death of the second prince, he would have one less competitor, but unexpectedly, the fourth princess suddenly appeared, took over the second prince's tribe, and competed with the third prince. He found another way and wanted to launch a rebellion in the south of the Yangtze River of the Chen state. He was almost successful, but was suppressed by a certain high-ranking official of the Chen state and ended in vain. The eldest prince failed in his assassination of the fourth princess and should have been severely punished, but the Khan turned a blind eye and instead wanted to pass the throne to the eldest prince. The third prince was forced to hand over his command talisman, faded away from the core of power, and encountered a low point in his life. However, under such circumstances, he killed the Khan and the eldest prince, fought a bloody path, and became the king of the grassland. Just when he got out of the lowest point in his life and climbed to the top, only one step away from that position, 50,000 of his 60,000 soldiers were captured, and he fell to the bottom again. In a short period of time, from the trough to the peak and then to the trough, most people may not be able to bear this kind of blow. The third prince slowly looked up at him, put down the raised teacup again, and asked, "What did you say?" The man looked pale and whispered, "Chief Hanel led 50,000 troops to encircle and suppress the fourth princess. Unexpectedly, he was captured on the way. Hanel and the 50,000 cavalry were captured by the fourth princess." The third prince looked at him and asked, 10,000 people captured 50,000 people. There was also a hint of disbelief on the man's face, and he said, "According to the spies who escaped, the fourth princess suddenly had hundreds of thousands of horses and 10,000 heavy cavalry." Hundreds of thousands of horses and 10,000 heavy cavalry, the third prince looked at him and asked, "The entire Sushan clan only has more than 100,000 people. Did her hundreds of thousands of horses fall from the sky?" My subordinates know that Khan does not want to believe it. The man gritted his teeth and said, "It is a fact that leader Hanel and the army were captured. I hope that Khan can regain his strength and keep the Green Hills, so that he will not have to worry about running out of firewood." The third prince was silent for a long time, then waved his hand and said, "Go down." The man raised his head and hesitated, "Khan. Go down." The man looked up, bowed and said yes, then slowly withdrew. The third prince picked up the teacup again, but just held it. His face was calm, but deep in his eyes, there was some kind of flame dancing. Boom! At a certain moment, the teacup in his hand suddenly shattered, the tea splashed everywhere, the fragments were inserted into his palm, and blood dripped on the table drop by drop. Wanyanyan already has 9 out of 10 of Sushen's combat power in her hands. These people are not wholeheartedly loyal to the third prince, so naturally they don't need to expend too much effort to subdue them again. As long as they can be promised enough benefits, there is no need to worry about them becoming rebellious. Of course, this is not something Wanyanyan needs to pay unilaterally. She alone cannot support Sushen's dozens of tribes. What Tang Ning needs to do now is to open up the trade route between Chen State and the grassland. The grassland needs Chen State's supplies, and Chen State also needs the grassland's specialties. In the process, they can gain great benefits. A happy life needs to be created by themselves. This is a path of mutual benefit and long-term development. Tang Ning sat at the table, thinking and writing down her development plan for the next few years. Xiaozhu lay on his bed with her legs crossed and asked, "Do you really want to leave her alone in the grassland to guard the boudoir?" "Worry about yourself," Tang Ning said without raising her head. "After returning to Beijing, Shang Shulu may break your legs if he finds out about your affairs. The love between men and women comes from human nature, and no dogma or high wall can stop it. Even in an era when etiquette was prevalent, things like eating forbidden fruits were common, but the fate of those people was much worse than that of young people in later generations. If you meet a reasonable father-in-law, you may be able to achieve a good thing, but if you meet a hot-tempered father-in-law, Xiaozhu's legs will definitely not be saved." Tang Ning herself felt that Lu Ding was not a reasonable person. Speaking of this, Xiaozhu shivered, got up from the bed, and said, "Please help me stop it when the time comes." Tang Ning shook her head and said, "You can handle your own matters by yourself." Xiaozhu said with a dark face, "You are not a friend enough." Tang Ning glanced at her mouth and said, "What are friends? Since you are unkind, don't blame me for being unjust." Xiaozhu looked at him and sneered, "I wonder what Miss Tang would do if she knew you raised a little wild horse on the grassland." Friends are meant to help each other, support each other when one party is in trouble, treat each other with sincerity, and share will and woe. Tang Ning put down her pen, looked at him, and said, "Don't worry, if Lu Shangshu breaks your leg, I will let him do it. Divine Doctor Sun connected it for you, and I guarantee that you can jump as well as before." Wanbu is very lively these days. The fourth princess recruited 50,000 strong men from the Sushan tribe. They all came from different tribes and had their own families. Now that the third prince had come to the end, the tribes began to move to the vicinity of the Huiyan tribe. The heads and leaders of each tribe, they all declared their allegiance to the four princesses. Compared with the eldest prince and the third prince, the fourth princess is more merciful and treats her tribes better. In the past, the tribes were afraid of the intimidation of the eldest prince and the third prince, and dared not act rashly. Now that the fourth princess has become the Khan, they naturally have no worries. At the same time, the original Huiyan tribe seemed a little miserable. 50,000 soldiers and horses turned to the fourth princess, and the third prince was doomed. The remaining 10,000 people also fled in the past few days, and the surrounding tribes moved away from here. Inside the big tent, one of them looked down, his face stern, and said, "Send people to each tribe to watch, whoever dares to defect again will be killed without mercy." The third prince waved his hand and said, "No need, if they want to leave, let them go." The man looked at the third prince and said anxiously, "Khan, you can't give up." Another person said, "Zonyan is right, we will leave the main tribe first, hide for 2 years, and then wait for an opportunity to move. As long as we are alive, there is still a chance." The third prince waved at them and said, "You go out, I want to be alone." Several people looked at each other, could only sigh, and left helplessly. After everyone left the big tent, the third prince was silent for a long time and took out a dagger from his sleeve. He carefully looked at the dagger in his hand, and it seemed that he could still see the blood stains on it. He once used this dagger to stab his father, the previous Khan, in the chest. Similarly, the previous Khan also died under this dagger. Its fate. The third prince murmured softly with a self-deprecating smile on his face. At a certain moment, a space in the tent was slightly bright. An hour later, the servant who delivered the meal saw the third prince again in the tent. There was a knife stuck in his chest, and the blood stained the front of his clothes red. With a faint smile on his lips, he leaned back in the chair, opened his eyes and looked ahead, as if he was inspecting his territory. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 738. In the main part of Huiyan tribe, 10 miles to the east, there is a fertile pasture. Bookmark our website. The pasture here is abundant, but no one grazes here because this is the cemetery of the Huiyan family. Wanianyun knelt on a piece of grass, with 3 tombstones standing in front of her. In the mound behind the tombstone are Huiyan Khan, the eldest prince, and the third prince. In this confrontation of power, the third prince killed his father and brother and ascended to the position of Khan. In the end, when the situation was over and there was no way to turn around, when he was young, he chose to commit suicide and ended it all. The Sushan clan also practices burial. They were born in the grassland, and their souls return to the grassland. They do not build tombs, erect tombstones, and leave no traces after death. Huiyan followed Han customs and erected monuments for the 3 of them. This was a kind of farewell, and it also represented that the Sushan clan had bid farewell to the past of robbery and fighting, and had opened a new era. They no longer regarded Chen Chu as a life and death enemy, and actively opened up, exporting excess cattle, sheep, and other items to Chen Chu in exchange for tea, porcelain, grain and other scarce items. When Wanyinyan announced this decision, none of the tribal leaders present objected. In the past few decades, the Sushan people have been caught between Chen Chu and Heiman, and they have been fighting in every direction, but this is not what they want. If you can herd horses and sheep in peace, who would be willing to pick up a machete and fight with others? They have an inseparable attachment to the grassland. No matter how good Chen Chu is, it is not their home. Their real enemy is the black barbarians who are eyeing him in the depths of the grassland. Being friendly with Chen will do them no harm at all. After Wanyinyan became Khan, they had a new escape route. Wanianyun had been kneeling on the grass for an hour. Tang Ning stood behind her, facing a certain direction, looking far into the distance. There is a vast sea of grass. Beyond that sea of grass is the boundary of Chen state. After the third prince committed suicide, more than a dozen of his cronies also committed suicide and died. The rest of the tribe declared their allegiance to Wanyanyan in the shortest possible time. The Khan is dead, the eldest prince and the third prince are also dead. No one competes with her for the position of Khan. From today on, she is the only king on this grassland. After Yan Yan came to power, Chen Chu established diplomatic relations with the grassland. Tang Ning's mission for this trip had been successfully completed, and it was time to go home. Tang Ning should have been very happy, but when she saw Wanyanyan's appearance, she couldn't be happy at all. Although the trip to the grassland had a happy ending, the process was extremely cruel. Her son killed her father, and her brother killed her brother. No one of her relatives was left, and she was alone in the world. No one understood it better than Tang Ning. After Wanyanyan paid homage to the three of them, she fell ill with a fever after returning. The imperial doctor said that she was suffering from excessive mood swings and excessive sadness, so he prescribed some soothing medicine and asked her to take a good rest. While Wanyanyan was resting in bed, Tang Ning was packing her bags in the tent. Before coming, he did not expect that the trip to the grassland would be like this, but no matter what, the result is always good. From now on, tens of millions of people in Chen State and the grassland will be free from war, at least until the end of the war. When Yan Yan was in power, Chen Guo and the grassland were able to coexist peacefully and benefit from each other. After packing his luggage, he walked outside the tent and saw Lao Zhang practicing his sword. These days, Lao Zhang and Wanyanyan's master are inseparable, and they are inseparable. Judging from the speed at which he changes his knife every day, there is no telling how many sparks they have created these days. Xiaoju was walking around on the grass, looking a little uneasy. Unlike Tang Ning, he had some resistance to returning to the capital. He could hide for a while outside, but when he returned to the capital, he would face the furious Lu Ding. Tang Ning stepped forward and comforted, "Don't worry, it's just one leg. If you break it, there will be another one. When the time comes, I will ask the Ministry of Industry to make a good pair of crutches for you." "Stop talking sarcastically," Xiaoju glared at her and said, "When this happens to you, I'll see what you do." Tang Ning glanced at him, but Xiaoju hadn't realized that there was a fundamental difference between him and him. He and Lu Ya were not married yet. This was a pregnancy out of wedlock. According to mainstream thinking, it was an immoral act. Tang Ning is a family man. If Xiao Ru or Xiao Yi gets pregnant, it will be a great event. The father-in-law and mother-in-law will only be happy. They will not be like Lu Ding. After learning that Lu Ya is pregnant, they will most likely just want to interrupt Xiaoju. Leg. Tang Ning glanced at him and said, "We are different." Xiaoju said, "You and the little wild horse." Tang Ning said, "We are still pure." In the evening, Aina came over and told him that the fourth princess had woken up. Wanyanyan had a high fever for 2 days and was in a coma all day and night. Tang Ning came to her tent and saw her sitting on the bed with her eyes open. Her face had returned to a little rosy, and she was obviously getting better. When Wanyanyan saw him coming in, she looked at him and asked, "When will you leave?" Tang Ning said, "The matter here is over. I will leave tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Wanyanyan got up from the bed, covered her mouth and coughed a few times, then asked, "Can't you stay a few more days?" "There is no difference between setting off tomorrow and setting off a few days later. We still have to face the moment of separation. What's more, Tang Ning has already returned home and doesn't want to delay for a moment." He looked at the medicine she put aside, changed the subject, and said, "Drink the medicine while it's hot." Wanyanyan took the bowl, touched her lips, and immediately put it down and said, "Hot. It's not hot." This was a medicine to soothe the nerves. There was nothing wrong with it after tasting it. Tang Ning was surprised when she picked up the bowl and took a sip and found that the medicine was warm. "Isn't it hot?" Wang Yanyan looked at him and said, "Try it again." Tang Ning often eats hot pot and may be able to withstand hot pot better than her, but it's not so exaggerated. He took a few bites and didn't feel it was hot. He put the bowl down and said, "Let's wait a little longer." After putting down the bowl, he suddenly felt a little sleepy, yawned, looked at Wang Yanyan, and said, "You can rest, I'll pay the bill." He stood up and suddenly felt the world spinning, his vision went dark, and he fell down on Wang Yanyan's bed. Wang Yanyan got up from the bed, with a look of success on her face. She helped Tang Ning take off her shoes and coat, and moved Tang Ning, who had fallen asleep, onto the bed. Then she lay on her side next to him, supporting her head with one hand, dreaming. Looking at him. Tang Ning slept very deeply, and when she woke up, she still had a slight headache. He couldn't remember exactly how he fell asleep last night. He only remembered that he went to Wang Yanyan's tent to see her. She said the medicine was too hot, and then he helped her taste the medicine, and then. After realizing what happened yesterday, Tang Ning suddenly woke up. He opened his eyes suddenly and saw Wang Yanyan wearing only a belly band, sitting on the bed, looking down at him, and said, "From now on, you are my man." Tang Ning sat up from the bed and asked in shock, "What did you do to me?" Wang Yanyan said, "We slept together last night." Tang Ning asked, "What else?" Wang Yanyan asked doubtfully, "What else?" Tang Ning checked her clothes and found that she only took off her outer clothes, shoes, and socks, and her underwear was still on. She didn't feel any discomfort, and she breathed a sigh of relief. She actually added something to the medicine. Thanks to her naivete, her knowledge in some aspects was still blank. Otherwise, Tang Ning's reputation would have been ruined during this trip. He put on his clothes and Wang Yanyan sat on the bed. As if she thought of something, she suddenly asked, "I'm not going to have a baby, am I?" Tang Ning glanced at her and said, "Yes." "Ah," Wang Yanyan was shocked, "but I'm not ready yet." After Tang Ning got dressed, Wang Yanyan crawled to the bed again, looked at him, and asked, "What do you want our child to be named?" Outside the tent, Xiaoju squatted on the grass, holding a branch and brushing his teeth with salt. He accidentally looked up and saw Tang Ning walking out of Wang Yanyan's tent, her expression stunned, and the branch in her hand fell to the ground. After a while, he picked up the branch and said fiercely, "Pure S. Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 739. Wang Yanyan has successfully taken the throne of Khan, the overall situation of the grassland has been determined, Tang Ning's mission is completed, and today is the day to set off. Bookmark this site. Outside the Wen tribe. The Chen army had returned 2 days ago. This time, only a few hundred elite soldiers followed Tang Ning and Xiaoju back. Wang Yanyan's face was full of reluctance. Standing outside the Wen tribe, looking at Tang Ning, she said loudly, "Don't forget our agreement." Xiaoju rode to Tang Ning and asked, "What agreement?" Tang Ning ignored Xiaoju, turned around and looked at Wang Yanyan, waved his hand, and shook the reins for a long time. When he looked back again, the Wen tribe had shrunk into a dot at the end of his sight. Outside the Wen tribe, Wang Yanyan still stood there. Even though the people and horses in front had disappeared long ago, she still did not retract her sight. Ayana stood beside her and said, "Princess, the prince consort has left." Wang Yanyan looked at him for a while before retracting her gaze. She touched her belly and gritted her teeth and said, "What a cruel person, leaving me and the child here." Ayana looked at her with a shocked expression on her face. "Child." Wang Yanyan's face showed a trace of shyness, and she said, "We slept together last night." Ayana looked at her for a long time before she came back from the shock. She pursed her lips and said, "I heard that giving birth is very painful." Wang Yanyan looked at her nervously and asked, "Is there a child? How painful is it?" Aina said, "I heard that giving birth is the most painful thing in the world, more painful than being cut by a knife. Many women died of pain when giving birth." Wang Yanyan couldn't help shivering and asked in a trembling voice, "Is it so painful?" "I don't know." Aina looked at her and said, "Princess, ask the women in the tribe who have given birth and you will know." Wang Yanyan returned to the Wuyan tribe with a heavy heart. She lifted the curtain of a tent somewhere. She wanted to find someone to ask how painful it was to give birth, but found that there were only a few girls in the tent, gathered together, chattering and talking about something. Wang Yanyan looked at them and asked, "Where is Aunt Amai?" Several girls were startled, turned their heads and saw Wang Yanyan, and immediately exclaimed, "Khan." One girl looked the most flustered and hid something in her arms. "What are you doing?" Wang Yanyan looked at them, her eyes finally stopped on the girl, and asked, "Kuma, what do you have in your arms? Let me see." The girl named Kuma blushed, but she didn't dare to disobey the Khan's order, so she had to hand over a thin book in her hand. Wang Yanyan flipped open the book casually and saw that it was full of pictures of naked men and women entangled together, and her face flushed. Although she knew a little about these things, it was the first time she saw these pictures. "But, Khan." When the girls blushed and didn't know what to do, they saw Wang Yanyan's body stunned, with an unbelievable expression on her face. She pointed to a page in the picture book, looked at the girl, and asked, "Is this the only way to have a baby?" The girl's face turned even redder and nodded slightly. Wang Yanyan stamped her feet in anger and said, "Didn't they say that two people sleeping together can have a baby?" The girl showed a puzzled expression on her face and asked, "Ah?" Wang Yanyan didn't care about them and walked out of the tent angrily. A young girl seemed to remember something and whispered, "The book was taken away by the Khan." After leaving the grassland and entering Fengzhou city, Tang Ning breathed a sigh of relief. Even if Wang Yanyan knew that having a child was not something that could be accomplished by two people lying in bed and sleeping, it was too late. Tang Ning was somewhat fortunate that she grew up in the grassland. If she was the same as Lu Ya, he would probably face the same problem as Xiaoju now. When Tang Ning saw Lu Ya again, perhaps because it was too short, her figure had not changed much. When they returned to the capital, they could easily see it. She was pregnant now and could not ride a horse, so she could only travel slowly behind. Xiaoju of course had to accompany her, but Tang Ning did not want to waste time behind. After only resting for one night in Fengzhou, he and Lao Zheng exchanged horses, left Fengzhou and galloped all the way to the southwest. From Fengzhou to Jiangxi province, you only need to cross a Guanyi road, then go through Qingzhou and Ningzhou, and you can reach Beijing in half a month. The victory news from the northwest had been sent to the capital several days ago, and it should have arrived in the past 2 days. Capital. Imperial Palace. Imperial Study. Good, good. Emperor Chen stood up suddenly with a piece of intelligence in his hand and laughed. "He really didn't disappoint me, he really didn't disappoint me." A few months ago, Tang Ning was ordered to go to the northwest, ostensibly to fight against the Sushan tribe, but his secret mission was to assist the fourth princess of the Wanyan tribe to become Khan, complete the establishment of diplomatic relations between the state of Chen and the grassland, and discuss peace. War is temporary, but peace is long-lasting. The latter task is much more difficult than the former. But he did it in just a few months. Since then, the state of Chen and the grassland can be free from war and coexist peacefully. If trade can be opened, the state of Chen can also gain huge benefits from it. The significance of this great event he accomplished this time is not only this. The greatest significance of this matter is that once the state of Chen no longer has to expend huge military forces in the north, it will be able to free up its hands to suppress the rebellion in the western regions. Now that the south has been settled, the grasslands are seeking peace, and the western regions are one family, it is difficult for them to stir up any more waves. Emperor Chen put down the secret letter and breathed a sigh of relief. The stone that had been hanging in his heart for many days was finally put down. Imagine if during his reign, the people lived in peace and the neighbors were stable, how would the history books record it? If the relationship between Chen state and the grasslands could be like that between Chen state and Chu state, he, Zhao Zheng, would have completed the great cause that the emperors of Chen state had not completed in the past. Wei Jian smiled and walked forward, saying, I congratulate your majesty and congratulate my Chen state. Emperor Chen suppressed his joy, walked into the hall, and murmured, this time, how should I reward him? The situation in the grasslands changed drastically. The new Khan was extremely friendly to Chen state. Not only did he sign a friendly agreement of non-aggression between the two countries, but he also opened trade routes for mutual benefit. From then on, for a long time, Chen state could be free from war with the grassland peoples. Such peace, which the people of Chen have been looking forward to for decades, is so precious. In the past few days, the entire capital was boiling with this great good news. With this news, a name that had been silent in the capital for several months was once again pushed to the top. Tang Ning, the Grand Marshal of the Northern Expedition. In the past year, he quelled the rebellion in Jiangnan and stabilized the situation in the northwest. Everything he did was earth-shaking and beneficial to the national economy and people's livelihood. Especially the northwest matter, it was almost that he reversed the grassland situation with his own strength and changed the relationship between Chen and the grassland people. At least he could keep Chen stable for more than 10 years. In the court, no one could surpass him in terms of achievements in the past few decades. Tang Ning sat in the carriage and heard these rumors about him all the way from the city gate. It is too exaggerated to say that he reversed the situation with his own strength. The reversal of the grassland situation relied on Chen's 10,000 heavy cavalry and the deterrence of hundreds of thousands of troops. Compared with them, he only did some minor work. However, of course he would not jump off the carriage to discuss these with them. He traveled day and night to return to the capital, and did not even go to see Emperor Chen, for something more meaningful. The carriage stopped in front of the Tang mansion. Tang Ning jumped off the carriage and waved to the gatekeeper, who was already shocked and speechless, indicating that he did not need to make a fuss. On the way from the gate to the inner courtyard, he ignored the maids and servants who were standing there in shock, picked up Qing'er, who was running over, and turned around, and then walked into the inner courtyard impatiently. Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi were not seen, only Tang Yaoyao was standing in the courtyard. Tang Ning walked over quietly and wanted to hug her from behind. He just stretched out his hand, and was grabbed by Tang Yaoyao's wrist, and then a huge force came from his wrist. Tang Ning felt dizzy, and after turning 360 degrees in the air, he fell heavily to the ground. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 740. Tang Ning lay on the ground paved with blue bricks, looking at the blue sky. At this moment, he was extremely doubtful. Could it be that he traveled thousands of miles day and night, rushing from the grassland to the capital, and did not go back to meet Emperor Chen first, but returned home first, just to be attacked by Tang Yaji? Shoulder fall? If I had known he would have gone to the palace first, I believe Emperor Chen would not have thrown him over his shoulder before they even met. His back felt very cold, and his heart felt very cold. He looked up at Tang Yaoyao and said, "You murdered your husband." Tang Yaoyao was also stunned. She didn't seem to expect that the thief who attacked her from behind was actually Tang Ning. A hint of surprise appeared on her face at first. When she saw him lying on the ground, she felt at a loss and hurriedly leaned over to grab him. He helped me up and said, "Who asked you to attack me from behind?" When Tang Yaoyao helped him up, Zhongyi and Su Ru heard the sound and walked out of the room, saying in surprise, "My husband is back." Tang Ning didn't notify anyone and went home quietly. She just wanted to give them a surprise and give Xiru and Xiaoi a loving hug. Nowadays, there is no hug of love, but there is one who falls over the shoulder of love. He endured the pain from his back, hugged the two of them into his arms, breathed a long sigh of relief, and said, "I'm back." After hearing the news that Tang Ning had returned to Beijing, Zhou Mingli and Chen Yuxian hurried over. Rich Tang returned to Lingzhou a few days ago and had not returned to Beijing yet. Chen Yuxian looked him up and down, and when he saw that he was unharmed, he finally felt relieved and said, "It'll be good to come back, it'll be good to come back." Ever since Tang Ning led the troops on the expedition and left the capital, her heart had been lifted up, and she didn't put it down until today. Then she had the thought to ask about other things. She looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Ning-er, is it true that what is being said outside is that the grassland will no longer be at war with us?" "No more fighting." Tang Ning nodded and said, "The grassland has changed its Khan. The new Khan is very friendly to the Han people. He has signed a contract with the court to non-aggression in the future and there will be no more wars." "That's good," Chen Yuxian said with a smile on his face, "this way, you don't have to go to dangerous places like the north." After she finished speaking, she pulled Zhou Mingli and said, "Let's go out first." Zhou Mingli followed her out, and Chen Yuxian walked to the door and said with a smile, "Let me just say, we don't have to worry about anything Ning-er does. It can be considered a great achievement to prevent the court and the grassland from fighting, right?" "More than just a great achievement," Zhou Mingli looked back, pursed his lips, and said, 20 years ago, this achievement would have been enough for him to break the earth and become the king." "Is this a great contribution?" Chen Yuxian looked at him in surprise and asked, "Can his official position be promoted again? If he is promoted, wouldn't he be prime minister?" "It is impossible for him to become prime minister. He is still too young." Zhou Mingli shook his head and said, "What I am afraid of is that your majesty will not reward you. By then, he will be in big trouble. It is not a good thing to have more achievements than the master." Within the room, Zhou Yi looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Ms. Sir, do you want to send someone to inform the Xiao family, the Fang family, and the Ling family about your return?" "Let's talk about it later." Tang Ning waved her hand and said, "If they find out, and socializing is indispensable, I want to spend these days with you." Zhou Yi nodded, and her eyebrows couldn't help but curve up. Tang Ning was knocked unconscious by Fairy Tang just now. All the bones in Tang Ning's body were about to fall apart. She couldn't help but touch her back. Su Yu looked at him and said in surprise, "Brother Ning, does your back hurt? Let me rub it for you." Fairy Tang's face turned red, and she hurriedly came over and said, "Let me rub the other side. It feels good to go home. How many men are working hard outside, and what they long for most is to have this warm scene when they come home." Tang Yao Yao rubbed her back and asked, "That little Mustang princess has become a Khan now?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "His third brother killed his father and eldest brother, and then committed suicide, so she became the new Khan." Su Ryu's face turned pale and she said, "Why is he so cruel? Even his relatives?" Tang Ning said, "For the sake of power, some people will do anything." Tang Ning told them what happened on the grassland, detailing everything and not hiding anything. He even told them about the sparks between Lao Zheng and Wan Yanyan's master. Both Zhou Yi and Su Ryu were shocked when the third prince killed his brother and father, but Tang Yao Yao caught something they didn't pay attention to. She looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Have you become the prince consort of the prairie?" Tang Ning coughed lightly and said, "This is just a temporary measure to destroy the conspiracy of the eldest prince and the third prince." "What happened next?" Tang Yao Yao looked at him and asked, "Have you explained it to those prairie people?" Although it was just a matter of interests, if Tang Ning really explained to everyone, the angry Wan Yanyan might leave him in the grassland as the consort of the stronghold. How would Tang Ning have the chance to come back to see them? Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "These are not important. I will tell you a secret secretly. Lu Ya is pregnant." "What? Sister Lu is pregnant? Could they?" Tang Ning's change of topic was very successful. Zhou Yisu and Tang Yaoyao were all shocked by the bombshell news and no longer asked him about what happened just now. Xiaoju once asked him what a friend was. A friend meant that when Xiaoju was in trouble, Tang Ning could run thousands of miles to save his life, and could also pull him out to protect her from the knife at the critical moment. After changing the topic, Tang Ning suddenly felt that something was not right in the atmosphere. By the time he realized what a stupid thing he had just done, Zhongyi and Suaryu looked at him with resentment. The two of them had wanted to have a child for a long time, and when they heard the news that Lu Ya was pregnant, they definitely weren't surprised or happy. Tang Ning looked at Tang Yaoyao for help. Tang Yaoyao looked at him with understanding and asked, "Did you explain it to those grassland people later?" Natural home. Tianashanju has been open in the capital for more than 10 years. It was not well known at first. However, because of a certain person, it attracted the attention of countless people in the capital in a short period of time and became the highest standard restaurant in the capital. Nowadays, although the most beautiful woman in the capital has married and has not been seen in Tianranju for a long time, this place is still the favorite place for the dignitaries in the capital to visit. A middle-aged man stood at the door of Tianashanju, looked up at the couplets at the door, and asked, "Is this Tianashanju?" Another attendant with a white face and no beard stepped forward, bowed and said, "This is the natural residence." The couplets at the door are said to have been inscribed by Mr. Tang when he came to Beijing a few years ago. The middle-aged man walked into Tianashanju and said, counting the days, "It is time for him to return to Beijing. I am really not used to him being away from Beijing." Wei Jian followed up and said, "As soon as Master Tang returns to Beijing, he will go to Beijing to reply to His Majesty's decree." Emperor Chen walked into the garden, looked around and said, "This garden is almost as good as the royal garden." Wei Jian smiled and said, "This was originally the garden of His Highness Prince Huai, and later the owner of Tianashanju bought it. From the perspective of regulations, there seems to be no violation here." Chen Huang did not dwell on this issue. A few days ago, his biggest worry had been calmed down by Tang Ning. In recent days, he was in a good mood. He left the palace today just to have fun. He looked at the crowds coming in and out of natural residence and said, "The people coming in and out here are not ordinary people. This is the best restaurant in the capital. Many powerful officials and young ladies from their families often have banquets here." Wei Jian looked around, pointed casually and said, "That's the Song dynasty of the Ministry of Justice, Your Excellency's young master, that is the daughter of the Yashi Zhongcheng family, and over there are Mr. Tang and his several wives." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 741. It is said that the consumption of this natural residence is extremely high. A dish can easily cost tens of taels of silver, which is beyond the reach of ordinary people. The annual salary of these officials is only the price of a dish, but they can often come and go here. My hands, there are still many rich people down there. After hearing what Wei Jian said, Chen Huang shook his head and sighed. The officials of the imperial court cannot be investigated. Except for their salary, no high-ranking official has some income that cannot be disclosed. If it is really necessary to investigate, there will not be many people left in his court. After sighing, Chen Huang seemed to have thought of something, and his steps suddenly stopped. He just realized that there seemed to be something different mixed into Wei Jian's words just now. He looked at Wei Jian, who had an embarrassed expression on his face. He pointed in a certain direction and said, "Your Majesty, that seems to be Mr. Tang. Tang Ning has been home for 2 days. During these 2 days, she has not been able to go out or take a step forward. It was only today that she and her wives went out to relax. Tianashanju is undoubtedly a good place to relax. It is located in the bustling area of the capital. It is noisy outside, but it is another cave inside. The people who come and go naturally are all dignitaries with status, good manners, and good manners. In the past, there were some dandies who ran wild here, but since King Kong lost his throne because of a shipwreck here, the quality of the guests here has improved again. A big improvement. Tang Ning accompanied Su Ryu to fly a kite on the open grass, while Zhongyi and Tang Yaoyao sat in the pavilion to rest. Zhongyi glanced in a certain direction on the grass, with a smile on his lips, and said, "My husband seems to be happier than before when he came back from the grassland this time." Tang Yaoyao, who has always been very nervous, stuffed a candied fruit in his mouth and asked, "Is there any difference between him and before?" "It's different." Zhongyi shook his head and said, "My husband used to hide things in his heart, but now he doesn't." Tang Yaoyao glanced in Tang Ning's direction in surprise, but still didn't see anything. She shook her head inexplicably and concentrated on eating her candied fruit. Tang Ning personally flew the butterfly kite she made for Su Ryu yesterday into the sky, and then handed the reel to her. Zhongyi and Tang Yaoyao had happy childhoods. One of them was born into an official family, and the other was a wealthy businessman. They had plenty of food and fun, but Xiao Ryu never even flew a kite. But it doesn't matter, Tang Ning now has plenty of time to teach her. During this trip to the grassland, Chen Guo and the grassland signed a contract to help each other and not invade each other. Chen Huang was relieved, and Tang Ning actually realized something. In the past, he always worried about where to go after leaving Chen State, but now he no longer needs to worry about it. The grassland is so big that it can accommodate their family. The burden on my shoulders became lighter, and my mood naturally improved. I looked up and saw that Xiao Ryu's kite was flying low, so I stood up and walked over to help her fly the kite again. Tang Ning pulled the string and backed away. She accidentally bumped into someone and the kite fell from the air to the lake. Tang Ning turned around, wanting to see who was walking with such a short-sighted look. When she saw Huang Chen with a dark face, her expression was stunned. After a long time, she awkwardly saluted and said, "Your Majesty, what a coincidence." Natural residence, in the original small courtyard of Sumei. Tang Ning's kite fell into the lake. He stood in the courtyard with his head lowered, staring at his toes, as if he was distracted. Chen Huang put his hands behind his back and looked at him, his face as dark as the bottom of a pot. Wei Jian stood sideways and behind Emperor Chen, looking at him with helpless eyes. "How long have you been back in Beijing?" After an unknown amount of time, Chen Huang finally spoke. Tang Ning said, "It's been 2 days. 2 days, Emperor Chen looked at him and said angrily, "It's been 2 days since I returned to Beijing, and you didn't come into the palace to see me." Tang Ning coughed lightly and said, "I have already sent the battle report from the north back to the capital as quickly as possible over 800 miles away." Emperor Chen raised his eyebrows. "Is this the reason why you don't go to the palace to return to your life?" Tang Ning lowered her head and said, "I am guilty." Chen Huang waved his sleeves and said, "Tell me, what are your crimes?" Tang Ning said, "Your Majesty said that I am guilty of whatever crime you have committed." "I am guilty of whatever crime your Majesty said. Please punish me." "Punish you?" Emperor Chen snorted coldly and said, "You have just pacified the south of the Yangtze River and the northwest, and have made great contributions to the country. If I punish you, what will the officials and the people think of me? The grasslands of the western regions will. What do you think of me? Do you want me to be called a fool?" Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, "I don't dare." "You don't dare? What else do you dare not do?" Emperor Chen glanced at him and said, "He returned to the capital first with the army, did not enter the palace to return to his life, and actually accompanied his wife to fly a kite. In your eyes, am I not as good as a kite?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "Actually, I have a hidden agenda when I return to Beijing so early." Chen Huang looked at him and snorted coldly, "What's the secret?" Senior, I came back to report the good news. Tang Ning said. Miss Lu Yalu, the daughter of Lu Shangshu of the Ministry of War, has given birth to a baby, and the Xiao family has a daughter. I came back so early to report the good news to General Xiao. Anyway, Xiao Ju has been sold once, so he probably doesn't mind being sold a second time. Tang Ning looked at Huang Chen and said, Your Majesty also knows that the Xiao family is very thin. This news is very important to General Xiao. Lu Ya is inconvenient and Xiao Ju will accompany him. As their best friend, I am entrusted by these two people to return to Beijing first and bring this news to General Xiao. Is the Xiao family happy? Emperor Chen raised his eyebrows when he heard this. He also took the Xiao family's affairs to his heart. If the Xiao family had an heir, it would be able to continue its glory for at least 2 more generations. In this way, he would also care about the deceased queen. There is an explanation. Then he looked at Tang Ning and asked, Have you told General Xiao the news? Tang Ning smiled awkwardly and said, Not yet. Although Chen Huang was so angry that his beard was twitching, he did not blame Tang Ning for not reporting the matter when she returned to Beijing. He took a few deep breaths of fresh air to calm down and said, Everything about the grassland, no matter how big or small, you can handle it. I'll tell you one by one. Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, Your Majesty, when I first arrived in the grassland, the situation in the grassland was unpredictable. The eldest prince and the 3 princes were vying for power. I finally helped the 4 princesses stabilize the situation, and then tricked them into plotting. People actually unite and want to force the 4th princess to get married. The 4th princess is the key to the peace of the Chen kingdom and the grassland. I always keep in mind the important task entrusted by your Majesty. How can I let the 4th princess marry someone else? I did not hesitate to take risks and almost lost my life to win the victory in that competition. First place, smashed the conspiracy of the eldest prince and the 3rd prince, but the eldest prince was so crazy that he even wanted to assassinate his own sister. I and the 4th princess were hunted for hundreds of miles. They chewed grass roots when they were hungry and drank when they were thirsty. I managed to save my life with great difficulty. Later, the 3rd prince killed his father and brother, taking over the position of Khan. Finally, he was defeated by the Iron Heel of Chen State and committed suicide. The 4th princess succeeded to the throne and was willing to coexist peacefully with Chen State and not invade each other. The process Tang Ning described was so dangerous that even Chen Huang was secretly worried about him. He had long forgotten about not reporting the matter when he returned to Beijing. When he looked at Tang Ning, his face softened and he said, Thank you for your hard work, dear. Tang Ning looked solemn as she bowed and said, No matter how hard it is, it's all worth it for your Majesty, the court, and the people. Emperor Chen looked pleased, nodded, and asked, So, the 4th princess of the grassland has been taken into your house by you. Tang Ning did not move Wang Yanyan into her room, but she almost moved her into her room. He looked at Emperor Chen, shook his head and said, Your Majesty is joking, I am not that kind of person.